My name is Daniel Ochoa. I am 41 years old, and at 9:17 on a Sunday morning, I heard my mother say, "Daniel gets nothing because Daniel has nothing to offer," to my brother Victor, in the kitchen of my parents' house in Albuquerque, while they believed I was still asleep in the basement guest room. She said it the way someone might say the milk was expired, a logistical observation, a settled fact requiring no further discussion. I was standing 7 feet away, on the other side of the basement door, holding a mug of coffee I had poured from the pot she brewed every morning at exactly 8:45. The coffee was still warm. I did not move. I did not set the mug down. My thumb found the chip on the rim, the same chip that had been there since I was 19, and I pressed the pad of my finger against it until the ceramic edge left a white crescent in my skin. Something behind my sternum went very still. Not shock, something colder. The part of my mind that had spent 16 years assessing seismic vulnerability data for insurance carriers began doing what it always does when a structure reveals a fracture it was never designed to survive. It started counting backwards, looking for the origin point. That skill had modeled catastrophic loss scenarios for buildings, bridges, and municipal water systems across the western United States. It was about to model my own family. But this isn't really for you, Mom. Not yet. You will hear this eventually, or you won't. What I need to do right now is talk to the people watching. Before I tell you what I found when I started looking, what time is it where you are? I want to know how many people heard something they recognized in that opening. Because if you have ever stood on the wrong side of a door and heard your own irrelevance stated as a household fact, then you already know. The worst part is not the words. The worst part is the silence that follows them, when nobody in the room objects. Let me explain what my mother did not know, and what no one in that kitchen understood, and what I had kept private for 11 years. I am the founder and sole owner of Terracline Risk Analytics, a catastrophe modeling and reinsurance advisory firm with $2.7 billion in total enterprise value. We build the probabilistic models that insurance carriers, sovereign wealth funds, and multinational development banks use to price risk on everything from California wildfire corridors to Caribbean hurricane exposure. When a city decides whether its infrastructure can survive a 100-year flood, someone in that decision chain is using our data. When a reinsurer decides how much capital to allocate against the next earthquake season, our models are on the table before anyone writes a number. 4,300 employees across 9 offices. My name appears on no public-facing materials. I operate through holding structures, a managing director who handles media, and a preference for silence that my family mistook for failure. My family believed I was a mid-level data analyst at a regional insurance adjusting firm. Salary around $62,000. Renting a 2-bedroom in a stucco complex off Coors Boulevard. Driving a 2014 Nissan Altima with a dent in the rear quarter panel that I never fixed because it supported the story they had already written. My mother, Gloria Ochoa, had been telling relatives for a decade that I was the quiet one who never found his direction. My father, Ernesto Ochoa, described me at family gatherings as the son who preferred computers to people, which was his way of explaining why Victor received the attention and I received the leftover chair. My older brother, Victor Ochoa, had just been named managing partner at a mid-tier commercial real estate brokerage in Scottsdale. His firm managed around $140 million in property assets, and he treated the number like a country's GDP. His wife, Camille, worked as a residential mortgage officer at a credit union and had a gift for making every conversation circle back to interest rates she had personally secured for clients. The Sunday I overheard my mother was the morning of a family brunch organized to celebrate Victor's promotion. 23 people had been invited to my parents' house, including aunts, uncles, cousins, and my grandmother, Estela Ochoa, who was 81 and had not attended a family event in 2 years because of her knees. Gloria had convinced her to come because Victor's promotion was, in her words, a once-in-a-generation family milestone. I had arrived the night before. My mother had asked me to come early to help arrange tables and carry folding chairs from the garage. Not to celebrate, to set up. When I walked into the house Saturday evening, she looked at my shoes, my jacket, and the duffel bag I carry when I visit, and said, "At least you are on time. Victor and Camille are bringing the good wine." That was my welcome. After the door closed behind me, I heard Victor's voice continue from the kitchen. He said he needed a favor, someone to handle parking logistics for a property showcase event his brokerage was hosting the following week at a repurposed warehouse space in the North Valley. He described it as a client-facing open house for potential investors. He needed bodies, he said. People who could direct cars, check names off a list, and stand near the entrance looking useful. Then he said my name. "Daniel can do it. Give him a polo shirt with the logo and tell him where to stand." Gloria answered with the sentence I had already heard. "Daniel gets nothing because Daniel has nothing to offer." She paused and then added, "But he is reliable when you tell him exactly what to do. That is his only skill." Victor laughed. Not cruelly, casually. The way you laugh at a description of weather. Then Camille said, "At least he will not try to network. Last time he came to one of Victor's events, he stood in the corner reading something on his phone the entire time." What Camille did not know was that I had been reading a draft report on commercial real estate exposure modeling in the Mountain West region. My firm had been hired to assess risk concentration in exactly the kind of portfolio Victor's brokerage managed. But none of them asked what I was reading. They never asked what I was doing. Asking would have required the possibility that the answer might contradict the story. The irony is that I had spent my entire professional life identifying hidden systemic vulnerabilities in structures that looked stable from the outside. Buildings, portfolios, municipal bonds, infrastructure networks. I could detect a mismodeled load-bearing assumption in a catastrophe scenario from 3 data points. But I had spent 40 years inside a family whose foundational assumption was that I was structurally irrelevant, and I had never once run the numbers on that. During the brunch, Victor sat at the head of the table, wearing a new sport coat and describing his plans for the brokerage. He explained that becoming managing partner meant he controlled acquisition strategy, client relationships, and a new fund he was assembling to purchase undervalued commercial properties across the metro area. Camille handed out brochures she had printed at a copy shop, and they looked professional enough until you noticed the capitalization errors and the fact that the projected returns column used round numbers with no sourcing. My Aunt Rosa asked how much the fund was targeting. Victor said 12 million in initial capitalization, with an expected return of 14% annually. He said it calmly, the way someone states a fact about gravity. My uncle Marcos, who owned a tire shop in the South Valley, said he wanted in. My cousin Elena asked whether family members received preferred terms. Victor smiled and said loyalty would be rewarded. Camille slid commitment forms across the table. Gloria looked at me and said, "Daniel, you should listen carefully. This is what ambition sounds like when it has a plan." I said the brochure looked thorough. Then I asked one question. I asked whether the fund had filed a Form D with the SEC or registered under New Mexico's securities exemption provisions. Victor's fork paused midway to his mouth. He said the legal structure was being finalized and that his attorney was handling compliance. Camille added that retail investment vehicles operated under different rules. I said nothing else, but my hands were flat on the table, and I could feel the grain of the wood pressing into my fingertips with a precision that meant something in me had stopped being a guest and started being an analyst. I was already mapping the exposure. Victor's projected returns assumed appreciation rates that no sober model supported. His capitalization target required at least 20 investors, and he was recruiting from family members who would treat a handshake like a contract. The fund had no auditor, no custodian, no operating agreement that anyone at the table had been shown. I knew this because I build the risk frameworks that detect exactly this pattern. Undercapitalized fund, concentrated investor base, projected returns detached from market fundamentals, regulatory filings absent or deferred. In my world, this is not ambition, it is a pre-loss scenario. After brunch, Gloria pulled me aside. She said Victor needed someone dependable at the property showcase, and that my showing up would prove I supported the family. She also said she and Ernesto had been discussing my future and believed I should move closer to them so they could help me make better decisions. She handed me a printed sheet, a job listing for an office administrator position at Victor's brokerage. $39,000 a year. The listing described duties, including mail sorting, supply ordering, and maintaining the break room. Victor approved it himself, she said. You would finally have a title. I told her I would think about it. She said thinking was my way of avoiding commitment, and that Victor never hesitated. That evening, while helping Estella to her car, she held my arm longer than the walk required. At the passenger door, she said quietly, "Your grandfather left something for you. I should have told you sooner, but your mother said it was handled." She pressed a sealed envelope into my coat pocket. I drove back to my apartment and opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter from my grandfather, Aurelio Ochoa, dated 3 years before his death, and a notarized addendum to his will. The addendum specified that a 19.4-acre parcel of undeveloped land near the Albuquerque International Sunport, land that had been in the Ochoa family since 1971, was to be held in trust for me specifically, with Estella as trustee, until I reached 30. I was 41. I had never been told it existed. I opened my laptop and ran a title search through TerraCline's property analytics platform. The parcel had been transferred 6 years earlier to an entity called Ochoa Legacy Holdings LLC. The managing member listed was Ernesto Ochoa. The transfer instrument referenced a signed waiver from me, dated August 2019, relinquishing my beneficial interest in exchange for what was described as family consideration previously rendered. I had never signed that document. In August 2019, I was in Zurich, presenting a sovereign risk model to the Swiss Reinsurance Institute. My passport stamps, hotel receipts, and conference registration would confirm I was 5,000 miles away from the notary office listed on the waiver. I contacted TerraCline's outside counsel that night. By morning, our forensic document team had pulled the waiver's notarization record. The notary, a woman named Sandra Vigil, had retired the previous year. Her logbook for August 2019, obtained through a records request, showed no entry for my name on the date indicated. The waiver's formatting used a template that matched documents filed by Victor's brokerage attorney, same margin widths, same footer font, same clause numbering convention. The signature on the waiver approximated mine, but omitted the slight leftward hook on the descender of the lowercase y in Ochoa. It is a habit I developed from years of writing on graph-ruled engineering paper. Anyone copying my signature from a scanned document would miss it because the hook disappears at low resolution. Over the next 2 weeks, I did not confront anyone. I worked the way I work, layer by layer. The parcel had been pledged as collateral for a $1.8 million line of credit that Ochoa Legacy Holdings had extended to Victor's brokerage, the same brokerage now soliciting family investment in an unregistered fund. The line of credit had been approved by a lender whose loan officer, I discovered through public filings, was Camille's former colleague at the credit union. The appraisal supporting the collateral valued the parcel at $2.1 million. A TerraCline analyst I trusted ran an independent valuation using current comparable sales, zoning data, and proximity to the Sunport commercial expansion zone. The parcel was worth approximately $8.6 million, 4 times what the appraisal claimed. Someone had suppressed the true value to make the collateral appear proportional to a modest credit line, preventing the lender from asking why a family holding company controlled an asset worth nearly $9 million, while the managing member's son solicited $12 million from relatives for an unregistered fund. Then I found something else. Victor's brokerage had listed 3 commercial properties as fund assets. One of them, a converted warehouse in the North Valley, the same property scheduled for the showcase event, had a title encumbrance I recognized. TerraCline had flagged it 18 months earlier during a portfolio review for a regional carrier client. The building had unresolved environmental remediation obligations from a previous industrial tenant. The estimated cleanup cost was between $400,000 and $700,000. Victor's fund brochure listed the property's value at $1.3 million. It made no mention of the remediation liability. The investors he was recruiting, Marcos, Elena, our family, would be buying into an asset whose actual net value was less than half what the brochure promised. The property showcase was scheduled for the following Saturday. Victor had sent me a text: "Wear the polo. Be there at 10, parking lot entrance." Gloria followed up with a voice message saying my attendance was not optional and that Estella planned to come because she wanted to see Victor's building. I called Rachel Montoya, a senior enforcement analyst at the New Mexico Regulation and Licensing Department's Securities Division. I had worked with her office 3 years earlier on a referral involving a construction insurance fraud scheme TerraCline's models had identified. I described the fund structure, the missing Form D, the inflated property values, the environmental omission, and the forged waiver. She said her office would send an observer to the showcase and that she was coordinating with the State Attorney General's Financial Crimes Unit. Victor, I want to make sure you understand what I found, because the next part is the part you thought no one would find. The warehouse Victor intended to showcase had been acquired through Ochoa Legacy Holdings using my land as collateral. My inheritance had been stolen, undervalued, pledged, and used to purchase a contaminated building that was now being marketed to our own family at an inflated price. The fund was not ambition. It was a cycle. Take from the person who cannot object, use the stolen asset to acquire a liability, dress the liability as an opportunity, and sell it to people who trust you because they share your name. On Saturday morning, I dressed in a plain navy jacket and drove the Altima to the North Valley warehouse. The building had been painted, landscaped, and staged with furniture that made it look like a functional co-working space. Victor stood near the entrance in a charcoal suit, shaking hands. Camille managed a registration table. Gloria greeted guests as though she had built the place herself. Ernesto stood near a display board showing fund projections. I parked where Victor had told me to park and walked toward the entrance carrying a messenger bag. He intercepted me and handed me a navy polo with his brokerage logo. "Put this on and manage the south lot. Direct overflow to the street." I took the shirt. I folded it and placed it on the registration table. Camille looked up and said, "Victor asked you to wear it, Daniel. It is not a suggestion." I said, "I will be inside for the presentation." Victor smiled at a passing guest and spoke to me without turning his head. "You are here to help, not to sit in a room you would not understand." 40 minutes later, Victor stood before 27 people, 14 of them family, in the warehouse's main floor, which had been arranged with folding chairs and a projection screen. He described the fund's strategy, its projected returns, and the 3 anchor properties. He called the warehouse a flagship asset positioned for significant appreciation. He did not mention the environmental remediation. He did not mention the collateral chain leading back to a parcel he did not own. Camille presented financial slides showing growth curves that assumed property values rising 9% annually for 7 consecutive years. When Victor asked if there were questions, I stood from the back row. He saw me, and his expression carried the particular exhaustion of someone whose younger brother was about to embarrass him publicly. "Daniel, this is for investors," I said. "I have a question about the warehouse's environmental status." Victor said remediation was not applicable to the current use case. Camille added that due diligence was handled by their legal team and that operational details were not part of the investor presentation. I asked whether the fund's offering documents disclosed the estimated $400,000 to $700,000 remediation obligation attached to the property. The room became quiet in a way that had texture, the kind of silence where you can hear folding chairs adjusting under people's weight. Victor said I was confusing this property with something from my adjusting work. Camille said I was not qualified to assess commercial real estate liabilities. Gloria stood from her chair and said, "Daniel, this is not the time for your anxiety. Sit down." Ernesto shook his head and told the room I had always struggled with social situations and that the family appreciated everyone's patience. I opened the messenger bag and placed 3 documents on the nearest table. The first was the independent environmental assessment Tara Klein had flagged 18 months earlier. The second was the forged waiver with my name on it, beside my passport entry stamps from Zurich dated the same week. The third was the title chain, showing how Ochoa Legacy Holdings had used my grandfather's parcel, my parcel, as collateral to acquire this building. Victor said the documents were fabricated. Camille said I had hired someone to create false records because I resented Victor's success. Gloria said I had always been jealous, and that the family had tried to help me, but I refused every opportunity. Ernesto said, "This is what happens when you let someone with no accomplishments into a room full of people who are building something." Then a woman near the projection screen identified herself. Her name was Rachel Montoya. She stated her title and agency affiliation. She said her office had received a referral concerning the fund's registration status, its property disclosures, and a related matter involving a potentially forged property transfer instrument. She said 2 additional investigators were present in the room, and that the Attorney General's Financial Crimes Unit had opened a preliminary inquiry. Victor looked at Rachel, the way a person looks at a wall where a door used to be. I said one sentence. I said it to the room, but I was looking at my brother. Victor does not build things. He reclassifies what belongs to other people and calls it his portfolio. I did not say another word during that meeting. Rachel's team collected the fund materials, the brochures, and Camille's financial slides. Investors were advised to consult independent counsel before transferring any funds. Marcos put his checkbook back in his jacket pocket. Elena walked out without speaking to Victor or Gloria. Estella remained seated near the back wall, both hands on her cane, watching her son and grandson the way someone watches a building they always knew was not up to code. The Securities Division issued a cease and desist order against Victor's fund within 11 days. The order cited failure to register, material omissions regarding property liabilities, and misleading return projections. Victor's brokerage license was suspended pending administrative review. Camille was named as a co-respondent for her role in preparing and distributing the financial materials. The Attorney General's office expanded its inquiry into the forged waiver. A forensic document examiner, retained by my attorneys, confirmed that the signature was not mine. The descender hook was absent. The pen pressure was inconsistent with my natural writing rhythm, and the notary's logbook contained no corresponding entry. Sandra Vigil, the retired notary, provided a sworn statement that she had no recollection of the transaction and that her seal may have been used without authorization. Ernesto and Gloria were named in my civil complaint for their roles as managing members of Ochoa Legacy Holdings. The court issued a temporary restraining order, freezing the parcel and prohibiting further encumbrance. Faced with the passport records, the handwriting analysis, and the notary's statement, my parents agreed to a settlement that restored full title to me, required reimbursement of all legal costs, and dissolved Ochoa Legacy Holdings. Victor and Camille separated 5 weeks after the cease and desist. Their mortgage, which Camille had personally originated through her credit union connections, entered default review when the brokerage income stopped. Victor moved into my parents' guest room. Camille retained an attorney and filed for divorce, citing financial misrepresentation during the marriage. Gloria called me once, 3 weeks after the showcase. She said the family was broken, and that I had chosen strangers over blood. I told her I had chosen the truth over the version of me she found most convenient. She asked whether I could help Victor find work. I said Victor could find work the way I did, by being competent and honest and not expecting someone else's inheritance to substitute for either. Ernesto never called. He mailed a single sheet of paper, a letter stating that everything he had done was to protect the family's future and that I would understand when I was older. I was 41, he was 73. I did not respond. Rosa, my aunt, sent a message 2 months later. It was long and careful, and honest in a way I had not expected from her. She said she had watched the family dismiss me for years and had told herself it was not her place to intervene. She said watching Rachel Montoya identify herself at the showcase was the moment she understood that silence had a cost she had been deferring. She apologized for not asking me a single real question in 20 years. She did not ask for anything. I read her message twice. I did not reply immediately, because I was not ready to separate her sincerity from the years that preceded it. 3 months later, I wrote back. I said I appreciated her honesty. I said I was not ready to rebuild anything, but I would not close the door. She said that was more than she deserved, and she meant it. The conversation remained unfinished, and I let it stay that way. I did not rescue Victor's brokerage or cover his mortgage. I did not fund Gloria's attempt to retain a family therapist who could, in her words, help Daniel understand what he did to us. I did not attend the Christmas gathering she organized the following year, the one where she told cousins I had been manipulated by corporate lawyers into turning against my own blood. But I made one decision that had nothing to do with punishment. Victor and Camille's daughter, Lucia, was 4 years old when the showcase happened. She had been at my parents' house that morning, playing with plastic horses on the kitchen floor, while the adults discussed parking logistics for an event built on a stolen inheritance. When Camille's attorney contacted mine about custody arrangements, I instructed my team to ensure that Lucia's educational trust, which Victor had listed as a fund asset in an early draft of the brochure, was legally separated, independently managed, and fully funded. I did not tell Victor. I did not tell Gloria. The trust was for Lucia, and it was not a gift from me. It was a correction. No child should inherit a debt structure disguised as a family. Estella and I spoke once a month after the settlement. She never apologized in words. She did something harder. She told me the full history, every decision Ernesto and Gloria had made, every conversation she had overheard, every moment she had considered intervening and chosen silence instead. She gave me the complete architecture of what I had lived inside. It was the most painful and most useful thing anyone had ever done for me. 8 months after the parcel was restored, I transferred it into a foundation. We built a seismic resilience training center on the land. A facility where municipal engineers, emergency managers, and insurance professionals from underserved communities across the Southwest could access catastrophe modeling tools and risk assessment education that had previously been available only to firms that could afford TerraCline's rates. I chose that purpose because my family had treated analytical skill as a lesser form of ambition. They believed that counting things, modeling systems, and sitting quietly with data was what people did when they lacked the charisma to lead. The center proved them wrong in a language they would never learn to read. At the dedication, I stood on the same 19.4 acres my grandfather had held since 1971. The Sunport runways hummed a quarter-mile south. The Sandias held their last hour of light to the east. I said nothing about my family. I talked about infrastructure, about the invisible systems that hold communities together, and about the people who maintain those systems without expecting a banner or a brochure. I think about what it means to hear the truth about yourself from someone who does not know you are listening. My mother spoke about me the way people speak about furniture they plan to move, not with malice exactly, but with the absolute certainty that the object has no preference about where it ends up. She was wrong about what I had. She was more wrong about what I was. But the thing I keep returning to is not her error. It is the silence in the kitchen after she said it. Victor heard it. Camille heard it. Nobody flinched. Nobody said, "Actually, Daniel might have more going on than we think." The silence was the agreement. The words were just the minutes of a meeting that had been running for decades. I do not believe that exposing what happened was revenge. Revenge requires the desire to harm. What I wanted was accuracy. I wanted the record to reflect what actually occurred. Who signed what? Who took what? Who knew what and when? Consequences followed because they were structurally inevitable once the facts were visible. I did not manufacture them. I removed the walls that had been hiding them. There is a difference between breaking something and refusing to keep holding it together. Last Tuesday, I sat at my own desk in the office I built, with no one's inheritance but my own effort. I opened a file, a new seismic model for a coastal development project. The first number on the page was $2.7 billion. The same number, measured in exposure, that I assess every quarter. I pressed my thumb against the edge of the desk. No chip, no crescent, just a surface I chose, in a room I earned, doing work that someone I loved once called my only skill. She was right about one thing. I count things, I count everything, and now the numbers are mine. If the people in your life spoke about you the way my mother spoke about me, when no one was supposed to be listening, what would you hear? And when you heard it, would you keep standing on the other side of that door? Or would you finally walk through it? This story is a fictional narrative created for entertainment, education, and dramatic reflection. We hope it reminded you that your dignity is not negotiable, and that setting a boundary, even a painful one, can be an act of love for yourself and everyone the pattern would have reached next.